Welcome back to the channel. I hope you didn't break your ankle like I did, but if you did, you're probably wondering, do I need surgery? And what should I expect before, during, and after? In this video, I'll take you along my journey from injury to surgery to my first steps of recovery. This is the second video in my ankle injury recovery series. So if you want a little bit more context about what happened here, watch my previous video first. The more that I learned about my injury and the more that I spoke with doctors about my injury, the more serious the injury seemed to get. So I was under the impression when I made my first video that I had a comminuted fracture to my distal fibula, which basically meant that my fibula was broken in more than two fragments. But as I learned more about my injury and as I underwent surgery, I learned that I also tore my deltoid ligament, which connects multiple bones on the inside of my ankle. So let's start off by addressing some key questions if you're contemplating your next steps in the aftermath of an ankle injury. Should you go see a doctor? When I hurt my ankle, I really wanted to convince myself that it was nothing more than just a bad sprain. Honestly, it had been so long since I had broken a bone that it didn't even seem like a realistic possibility that I could have broken my ankle. On top of that, I've always had skepticism when it comes to going to the doctor. I really wanted to avoid going to a doctor just for he or she to tell me to go home, ice it, and get a lot of rest. So, what should you do? Ultimately, obviously, it's always going to be a personal decision whether you should see a doctor based on your personal injury and your circumstances. That being said, one takeaway that I have from this experience is the importance of seeing a doctor to be able to conclusively determine whether you have sustained a fracture, because you really need to be able to get an x-ray in order to make that determination. Obviously, you cannot do that on your own or by watching YouTube videos like this one. Also, in talking with other people who have had their own ankle injuries, as well as reviewing stories from other individuals online, one thing I've noticed is that it's very common for people to sustain ankle injuries, especially injuries to the distal fibula, like the one I had, without realizing for multiple weeks that it's actually broken. And I think the reason for this is because the fibula is a non weight bearing bone. The purpose of the fibula is to connect with the tibia and provide support to the ankle complex. But because it's not weight bearing, very often, depending on the type of the fracture, you could continue with your normal day to day activities without experiencing significant pain. The only problem with that is the longer you delay intervention, whether that's surgery or some other form of stabilization in the interim, the longer you put that off, the more likely it is for that ankle complex and the bones in your ankle to become displaced or become further displaced, which will decrease your chances for a full recovery, whether or not you get surgery. In my opinion, this doesn't mean that you should go to the doctor for any little injury to your foot. In fact, as I was doing research into my own situation, I learned of something called the Ottowa Ankle Rules, and I'm going to link a video in the description for a more comprehensive review of what that looks like. But essentially, it's a three-part test that you can do on your own at home to point yourself in the direction of whether you might have a fracture or whether it might just be a sprain. The three-part test, interestingly, is what the urgent care doctor did without me realizing it when I first went to the doctor the day after my injury. And it's comprised of a four-step walk where obviously if you broke your ankle, it's going to be pretty difficult to walk, but that alone is not going to be conclusive of a break. The second component of it would be touching your fibula, the outside of your ankle, applying pressure to the outside of your ankle as well as the inside of your ankle, the medial malleolus, and determining if there's sensitivity to the touch will influence whether or not the bone may have been compromised. And then the third component would be touching down towards the foot, specifically the fifth metatarsal. And so, if all three of those tests are negative, you have a very high chance of a ankle sprain or something that's not an ankle fracture. If one or more of those tests are failed, then that increases the possibility of the issue being a fracture to one or more parts of your ankle. So you can use this test in lieu of going to the doctor, if all three parts are negative, I might be inclined to hold off on going to the doctor if you're on the fence. Do you need surgery? If you had an ankle sprain, it's very likely that surgery is not going to be required, although it is possible for a more serious ankle sprain. What I've done more learning about is ankle fractures. And surprisingly, if you sustained a minor fracture, especially if it was a fracture to only one of the bones in the ankle complex, it is possible for that fracture to be able to heal on its own. You'll still require some level of intervention, whether that's a brace or a soft cast, something to immobilize those bones to allow for a non-disrupted recovery, and again to make sure that that fracture doesn't get worse over time. On the other hand, if you have multiple breaks, or if any of the breaks in your ankle cause a shifting in those bones, it's going to be much more likely that surgery is required. And unfortunately, this was the nature of my injury. So when I first went to the urgent care doctor, she performed the Ottawa Ankle Rules. She did an x ray, realized conclusively that I had an ankle break, but wasn't 100% sure that surgery would be required. She referred me to an orthopedist, and the orthopedist very quickly and confidently indicated that surgery was going to be the best next step for me in order to make a full recovery. It was pretty surprising, but again, that surgeon was very confident based on my x rays and based on my demographics as somebody who would be likely to recover from surgery and has kind of a long time horizon in order to be able to do that. Still, I wasn't 100% confident that surgery was the best option for me. So I saw a different orthopedist, and that orthopedist had the exact same conclusion, which made me feel a lot more confident about moving forward with surgery as my recovery decision. In addition to helping me feel more confident about my decision, having multiple opinions from different orthopedists also gave me greater flexibility in scheduling my surgery. The first orthopedist that I went to didn't have availability for multiple weeks, whereas the second orthopedist I went to had availability within only a few days of seeing him, which was only about 10 total days from the injury itself. For me, it was very important to be able to get the surgery done as quickly as possible so I could expedite my timeline for recovery, even if I didn't have an urgent, pressing medical need to get the surgery done as quickly as possible. One final consideration for whether or not surgery is right for you comes down to your recovery goals, your age, and your overall medical health. For me, as someone who wanted to be able to resume an active lifestyle as quickly as possible, and someone who is young and overall very healthy, surgery was clearly indicated by both physicians as the kind of obvious course for next steps. But that may look very different for you depending on what kind of lifestyle you want to lead, how old you are, or whether or not your particular health circumstances could make surgery a greater overall risk. So obviously that's a decision that you'll need to come to with your doctor. Surgery is still a really big decision, even if you are young, healthy, and looking to make a full recovery. So at the end of the day, that's really the only way that you're going to be able to make that decision, is to weigh those factors, consult with your physician, and make that final decision on whether or not surgery is the best next step. That's going to be it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, I'm going to be putting out more videos as I go through my ankle recovery. In the next video, I'm going to explain what to expect before, during, and after surgery. So if you think that would be helpful, feel free to check back in a week or so. Thanks for watching the video, and best of luck with your recovery.